What would happen if Germany, the fourth largest economy in the world, decided it no longer trusts the United States enough to let it safeguard 450 billion euros in gold? That's not a hypothesis. It's happening right now. Imagine waking up to discover that half of your family fortune is stored in a neighbor's house who's been acting erratically lately, threatening other neighbors, changing the rules of the game every week. Would you feel comfortable? Germany doesn't either. Today, we're going to talk about something that sounds like a geopolitical thriller, but is absolutely real. The debate shaking the power circles in Berlin about bringing home the gold reserves that have been sleeping in the vaults of New York, London, and Paris for decades. And believe me, this isn't just about shiny bars. It's about broken trust, crumbling alliances, and the end of a world order we took for granted. Welcome. What you're about to hear, you won't see on the evening news. Let's start with the numbers, because they're brutal. Germany owns the second largest gold reserves on the planet, surpassed only by the United States. We're talking about approximately 3,350 metric tons of pure gold. At current prices, that's worth close to 450 billion euros. It's a figure so large it's hard to comprehend. To put it in perspective, it's more than the annual GDP of entire countries like Austria or Norway. But here's the uncomfortable detail. Only slightly more than half of that gold is physically in Germany. The rest, about 200 billion euros in precious metal, is stored in foreign vaults. Most of it at the Federal Reserve in New York, another significant portion at the Bank of England in London, and some more at the Bank of France in Paris. Why? The answer takes us back decades. During the Cold War, Germany was literally divided. The Berlin Wall wasn't just a symbol, it was a real border between two worlds. West Germany depended completely on its Western allies, especially the United States, for its survival. In that context, keeping gold reserves in New York made perfect strategic sense. First, it guaranteed immediate access to US dollars in case of crisis. Second, it offered liquidity in global financial markets without needing to physically transport tons of metal across the Atlantic. Third, and perhaps most important, it was a signal of mutual trust. We keep our national treasure in your territory because we trust you as an unwavering ally. That logic worked for decades. No one in Bonn, and later in Berlin, seriously questioned the arrangement. The United States was the undisputed leader of the free world, the guarantor of international order, the reliable partner. But something changed, and it changed dramatically. The first tremor came in 2013, when the Bundesbank, Germany's central bank, announced a plan to repatriate 300 tons of gold from New York and 374 tons from Paris. The goal was to have half the reserves on German soil by 2020. At the time, the decision was presented as a measure of transparency and public confidence. Some German citizens had begun questioning whether the gold really existed, or if it was just an accounting entry in a ledger. The Bundesbank wanted to prove the metal was real, tangible, verifiable. But beneath that official narrative were deeper currents. Already in 2013, some analysts were noticing cracks in the transatlantic relationship. The NSA spying scandal revealed by Edward Snowden had shown that the United States spied even on its closest allies, including Chancellor Angela Merkel. Trust, that intangible but crucial asset, was beginning to erode. Still, the repatriation process was slow, methodical, almost ceremonial. There was no urgency, no panic. It was more a technical adjustment than a political statement. Fast forward to 2025. The landscape is radically different. Today, prominent figures from the German establishment are openly, publicly, unequivocally calling for Germany to bring all its gold back home. And we're not talking about marginal or conspiratorial voices. We're talking about parliamentarians, top-tier economists, former Bundesbank officials. Marie-Agnes Strack-Zimmermann, who chairs the Defense Committee of the German Parliament, said it unambiguously. In a time of growing global uncertainty and under Trump's unpredictable politics, it is no longer acceptable to have so many gold reserves in the United States. Let me repeat that. The chair of the Defense Committee, someone at the heart of Germany's national security apparatus, is publicly saying that the United States is no longer a safe place for German sovereign assets. Emanuel Mönch, a respected economist and former head of research at the Bundesbank, was even more direct. Given the current geopolitical situation, it seems risky to store so much gold in the United States. We need greater strategic independence. Even the Greens, a traditionally pro-Atlantic and pro-NATO party, have joined the chorus. Katharina Beck, their finance spokesperson in the Bundestag, argued that gold reserves are an important anchor of stability and confidence that must not become pawns in geopolitical disputes. Do you see the pattern? This is no longer a niche debate. It's mainstream, it's bipartisan, it's the emerging new consensus. So what changed? Why now? The answer has a first and last name, but it goes far beyond a single person. It has to do with how the United States has weaponized its economic power in recent years. Let's start with sanctions. After Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022, the West froze approximately $300 billion in Russian central bank assets. It was an unprecedented measure. Never before had such a massive amount of sovereign reserves from a nuclear power been immobilized. The measure was applauded in Europe as a forceful response to aggression, but it also sent a chilling signal to every other country in the world. If you have your assets in dollars in Western banks, in vaults in New York or London, those assets can be frozen, confiscated, or used as political leverage at any time. China understood immediately, India too, and Germany, though on the right side of that decision, also took note. Because here's the uncomfortable question keeping strategists in Berlin awake. If the United States can freeze Russia's assets today, what's to stop it from doing the same to Germany tomorrow if a disagreement serious enough arises? Sounds paranoid, right? But listen to this. In 2024 and 2025, the Trump administration launched a series of trade wars against its own allies. Tariffs on European steel and aluminum, threats of tariffs on German automobiles, pressure for Europe to buy more American liquefied natural gas at inflated prices, demands that NATO countries spend more on defense or face consequences. And then there were the statements. Trump publicly suggested the United States might withdraw from NATO if allies didn't pay their fair share. He questioned whether the United States should defend countries that, according to him, weren't contributing enough. He talked about Greenland, a Danish territory, as if it were real estate the United States could simply buy or take. For European elites, accustomed to decades of predictable diplomacy and stable alliances, this was an existential shock. Michael Yeager from the European Taxpayers Association expressed it with a direct question. If the United States is willing to talk about acquiring Greenland, a territory of a NATO ally, what makes us think it would respect our gold reserves in a serious crisis? It's a brutal question, and it doesn't have a comforting answer. But there's something deeper at play here, something that goes beyond Trump or any specific administration. The world is changing. The unipolar order that emerged after the fall of the Soviet Union, where the United States was the undisputed superpower and everyone else was, to a greater or lesser extent, subordinate, that world is ending. China is now the second largest economy on the planet, and by some metrics, has already surpassed the United States. India is growing rapidly. Russia, despite sanctions, remains a relevant actor. Even middle powers like Turkey, Brazil, or Saudi Arabia are playing their own geopolitical cards with greater boldness. Europe, and Germany in particular, finds itself at a crossroads. For decades, its strategy was simple. Ally unconditionally with the United States, delegate security to NATO, focus on trade and economic prosperity. That strategy worked brilliantly during the Cold War and the years after. But now, with an increasingly unpredictable United States, an increasingly assertive China, and an increasingly fragmented global landscape, that strategy seems dangerously obsolete. The repatriation of gold is, in that context, much more than a financial decision. It's a statement of intent. It's Germany saying, we need greater autonomy. We need to be able to make our own decisions without depending completely on Washington. We need, in short, to recover our sovereignty. There's another fascinating angle to this story that almost no one is discussing: the precedent this sets. If Germany, Europe's largest economy and one of the United States' closest allies, decides to repatriate its gold due to lack of trust, what message does that send to the rest of the world? Japan has enormous reserves in dollars and U.S. Treasury bonds. So does South Korea, Saudi Arabia, Taiwan. All these countries have trusted the United States as the de facto custodian of their reserve assets. If Germany breaks that pattern, if it establishes the precedent that even the closest allies must protect their assets by bringing them home, we could be witnessing the beginning of a wave of global repatriation, and that would have massive consequences for the international financial system. The US dollar is the global reserve currency, largely because the world trusts that the United States will respect dollar-denominated assets. If that trust erodes, if countries begin to aggressively diversify out of the dollar, the exorbitant privilege the United States has enjoyed for decades, the ability to print money and have the world accept it, that could end. Not overnight, not in a dramatic collapse, but in a slow, steady, irreversible erosion. So what's going to happen? Will Germany really bring all its gold back? Honestly, no one knows for certain. The debate is ongoing. There's resistance within the German establishment itself. Some argue that physically moving hundreds of tons of gold is logistically complex and costly. Others point out that keeping part of the reserves abroad still has advantages in terms of liquidity and market access. But what's undeniable is that the conversation has changed. 10 years ago, suggesting Germany should repatriate its gold due to distrust of the United States would have labeled you a marginal conspiracy theorist. Today, it's a position defended by parliamentarians, respected economists, and establishment figures. That, in itself, is a seismic shift. And it's not just Germany. France has begun talking about European strategic autonomy. Macron has openly said Europe cannot depend indefinitely on the United States for its security. Italy, Spain, even Poland are reconsidering their relationships with Washington. The transatlantic order that defined the world for 75 years is under review, and German gold is just the tip of the iceberg. Let me close with a reflection. We live in an era of transition. The old order is dying, but the new one hasn't been born yet. And in those moments of transition, certainties disappear. Alliances that seemed eternal become fragile. Assets that seemed secure become vulnerable. The story of German gold is, at its core, a story about trust. And trust, once broken, is almost impossible to fully repair. The United States can argue it remains Germany's most reliable ally. It can point to decades of cooperation, the nuclear protection it provides, the deep economic ties. And all of that is true. But it's also true that recent actions, the trade wars, the threats, the erratic rhetoric, have planted seeds of doubt. And those seeds are germinating. I don't know if Germany will bring all its gold back, but I know that the fact we're having this conversation, that it's a serious debate in power circles, is in itself a sign that something fundamental has changed. The world we knew is ending, and what comes next, no one knows for certain. But one thing is sure, when countries start bringing their gold home, it's because they're preparing for uncertain times. And perhaps we should too. If this analysis made you think, share it, subscribe to the channel, and leave me in the comments, do you think Germany should bring its gold back? Or is this an exaggeration? See you in the next video. And remember, in times of uncertainty, information is your best asset.